Hi, I'm Doug Berman. When I was in fifth grade, I failed a math test. I'd been out playing with my friends, I should have been studying, and my dad decided that I should then spend the next Saturday confined to my room where I could contemplate my misdeeds. Saturday comes, I'm in my room, I'm not at all happy about it. My friends are out on the street playing, I can see them, and I have this idea. I'm going to create this sign. So I make a big sign and I hang it out the window. And it says, Arthur Berman is unfair to his children. And I sit and I wait for him to get home. He gets home, I hear his car come in the driveway, and I wait for the reaction. And I wait and nothing happens. And I'm thinking, maybe this wasn't such a good idea after all. Finally, I can't stand the tension anymore. So I open my door and I look out, and in the hallway, he has taped up a bunch of signs saying things like this: Doug Berman doesn't know his ass from base 10. Now, why am I telling you that? The answer is because creative acts, even very small ones like that, can change the way people think. And I remember that to this day, and there are lessons in it for me. It taught me that humor can diffuse anger and humor can impart a message, and those are things that I've used. The problem in doing creative work is that it's not always easy. There's a lot of doubt involved. There's some insecurity, uncertainty. When you're doing something innovative, by definition, it hasn't been done before. So, how do you know when it's good? How do you know when you're done and it's ready to be seen or heard or whatever? So what I want to do is give you a framework, a way that I look at this stuff when I'm working on something. And when I talk about creative work, I really want it to be as broad as possible. Obviously, stuff I do, radio comedy, but documentaries, film, writing, music, starting a restaurant, starting a business, anything that is something that someone hasn't done before, and you have to figure out how to get there. Here's where I start. I try to figure out what I love the most in the draft I've done. And by that, I don't mean something general. I want something very specific, like a moment, okay? Like, this is the moment I love best in this whole thing. And then I want to find the moment or moments that I really like least. And here's where the work starts. I want to try to define the elements in the moment I love most. I want to figure out what forces, what did I do there to get that? What characters, what concepts allowed that moment to happen? And once I've got that, I want to use that information to create more of those moments like the one I love, and I want to replace some of the stuff I don't like as much. That's the plan. And when I do that, it becomes a series of engineering problems. Now, why engineering? Because what we're looking for is the creative mechanism that allowed for something sort of special to happen. And we're trying to figure that out, and we're tinkering with a goal in mind, and that's what engineers do, some engineers anyway. Let me give you a more specific example so you can see what I mean. When I was developing Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, and I listened to some of the first drafts, what I really loved were these moments when our host, Peter, was interacting with the panelists around a specific story and the details of that story. And we were talking about the story and the panelists were jumping in, and it created this great radio. What I didn't love were the questions and answers themselves. It felt like we were just waiting for something to happen. So I decided I'd put this in graphic form because I figure that's what engineers do, right? So here's what I've got. I've got point A, which is the question being asked. And I've labeled that NF, which stands for not funny. I've got point B, which is the answer, when the answer is given, And I've also labeled that not funny. I've got point C, which is the discussion of the story. And that, fortunately, gets an F. That's funny. Okay, so the specific example we're working with, and we're going to try to fix, is this story about Ulysses S. Grant. When he was president, he was riding his horse in Washington, D.C., and apparently he was going fast. And he was stopped by somebody and given a citation for going too fast. Okay, I love it. It's fun. That's going to be fun to talk about. But how do we craft the question and the answer so those are also fun? We have to set up the drama, the tension. We have to relieve it. And all of that has to be funny. And here's where we ended up.
Roxanne, Ulysses S. Grant was, as far as we know, the first president and probably the only president to get a what while riding a horse?
Oh, come on. That's ridiculous. Roxanne has family here.
Perhaps you'd like to rephrase the question.
No. Sadly, I don't. Anyway, to rephrase it for you, Roxanne, he was riding his horse one day when he received something that, as far as we know, no president has ever received while riding a horse, or perhaps no president has ever received. There's no way. Every conceivable turn of phrase that is coming to my brain seems obscene at this point.
I have a guess, actually.
Go ahead.
I'm going to say a haircut or a shave.
No. I'll give you a hint. What is interesting to imagine is President Grant being chased by a police officer on another horse waving a red lantern.
A speeding ticket.
Yes, he did.
Okay, so now we've got point A, the question, F. We've got point B, the answer, F. And we've got point C, the discussion, F. So I've got 3 Fs, which is 2 more Fs than I had on my math test, by the way. And once we have that construct, that formula for how we want the questions and answers to work, we're able to apply that going forward and not only use it to craft future questions, but even to evaluate material. Does it have those elements? Is that going to work for our show? And, that ended up being a core piece of the show that you hear. Let me give you another example from Car Talk when that was being developed. What I loved when I listened to early tapes of that was the interaction between Tom and Ray, who were the hosts, and the callers. And they had these very funny human interactions in between the stuff that I didn't love as much, which was the car information. Okay, and so when I took that apart and broke it down to its elements, there was a conceptual thing I needed to deal with. And the problem was I was looking at the show in a traditional call-in show framework. So in a traditional framework, the caller has a question, calls the show, the host gives the answer to the caller takes the information, says thank you, and leaves, and the audience observes the whole thing. Where we needed to get was with the host and the caller both serving the audience. So the host and the caller are essentially production elements, and they're serving the audience in this case. And what that allowed us to do, what that freed us from, was this need to serve the caller entirely and in great detail. So we're able to take the car questions and use them as a narrative ladder and a narrative structure to move us through these wonderful interactions between the hosts and the callers. And that's what the show became. And that's what you hear. And here's an example.
So what's going on, Christy?
I want to ask you guys about a car problem that happened about 15 years ago to my dad's old citation that I was driving. I've been feeling bad about it for a while, and I just kind of like to find out exactly what happened.
You want closure. They call this closure.
Yes, it is closure.
Yeah. This is something that's been plaguing you for 15 years, causing you nightmares.
Is it something he's been blaming you for 15 years?
Well, no, he doesn't really know. I mean,
But there is still reference to it after all these years?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's there's, the car died, and I think he was kind of surprised.
Lay it on us.
Okay. I was about 16 years old, and I was driving from South Bend, Indiana.
Oh, it was your fault.
Well, shut up.
So what happened was she was driving. She borrowed her dad's car to go to a college party. She was 16. She drives about 2 or 3 hours into the night, and every light on the dashboard is flashing at her, begging her to pull over to save the car. She keeps driving, and the engine essentially melts and turns into a molten pile of steel, at which point she calls her father and says, "Dad, there's something wrong with your car." So we got her dad on the phone with her on the show, got her to confess. She apologized. He was very gracious, and it was a wonderful moment. And that's what the show ended up being, stuff like that, rather than the details of why the engine malfunctioned, which I thought was much better. Going back to this framework that I'm sharing with you, what do I love most? What do I love least? What are the elements of what I love most, and how do I use those to create more of those? I want to give you a few other thoughts to keep in mind while you're doing that. One is that, your ideas, while wonderful, aren't very far along when they're just ideas. You really have to do something with them. So I would encourage you to take your idea and at least try it out in the form you're working in. You will learn so much from that very first step, from taking it from an idea to a first draft. You'll learn more in that step than you may in the rest of the entire project. Then once you have that draft and you're you've identified a moment or something special in it that you really love, and you've tried to tease out the elements, I'd encourage you to experiment with confidence. In other words, you think you know the elements that are making it happen. Try some of them. Try them in different ways. Don't be afraid. At the same time, evaluate your ideas with humility. We sometimes get wedded to our approach or our ideas, and we're so determined to have them succeed that we don't evaluate with humility. Ideas are hypotheses. They have to be tested. They have to be tested with you, first of all, see if you love it, and ultimately with an audience. Let me leave you with one more thought. A few years ago, a woman wrote to us at Car Talk, and she said she had been listening to the show for years and years with her husband. And her husband had, unfortunately, contracted early onset Alzheimer's and had been lost to her now for several years and really just wasn't there. They're driving along, she's driving him to an appointment, and Car Talk is on, and the guys start laughing with their kind of infectious laughter. And suddenly, he starts laughing. And she looks at him, and she starts laughing. And they're looking at each other, and they're laughing together, for the first time in years. And they're having this moment of really special connection. And she's just looking at him and laughing and enjoying it so much that she doesn't realize when she plows into the back of a Ford pickup truck. But, she writes to us, it was worth it. And that's my message to you, that it's worth it. This work that we do in creating things, in creating art and culture and anything else or business, it's full of self-doubt. It's chock full of failure. And even if you get to the end, you have to deal with critics or customers, or all these other horrible things. But if you succeed, you can change the way people think. And you can change the way people feel. And you might even do it for the rest of their lives. So stay at it. And I'll look forward to seeing whatever it is you guys create. Thank you.